What's up, everyone? Jeremy Gerard from Mythic Customs here with one of my short customizing tutorial videos. The topic of today's video is belts. That's right. These little plastic belts, they come with every Mythic Legions figure. That is the topic of today's video. You may be thinking, are you really going to do an entire video on Mythic Legions belts? Yes, I am. Because using these belts in your customs, as simple as it is one of those pieces of low-hanging fruit that I think too often we can ignore when we're customizing. We get so focused on using a 3D printed head or doing some really complex paint job that some of the really simple customizations that we can do with things like belts are things that we ignore. So what I thought would be a lot of fun is to look at just some of the ways that I've used belts in my customs over time and some of the interesting looks that you can get out of just using these accessories differently in your Mythic Legions figures. Cool. So first things first, talk a little bit about the belts. One thing you should know is there are two different kinds of belts. There are essentially the 1.0 belt and the 2.0 belt. So if you're not sure about the difference between Mythic Legions 1.0 and 2.0 figures, there's an article on sourcehorseman.com that covers this. But in a nutshell, the 1.0 figures, which is what they've been called, are the original body styles that were available. These are the ones that came out in the initial Mythic Legions, the first series that came out, the initial Kickstarter, and the series after that. They're like the barbarians, the dwarves, the larger skeletons, all of those type of figures, the minotaurs. Those larger scale figures are 1.0. 2.0 are the figures that are a little bit smaller in stature, a little bit thinner. Those are the ones that came out starting in Advent of Decay. So those would be the females, the elves, the goblins, body pieces like that. So they're smaller bodies. There are two different kinds of belts that come with them because of the different body styles. Now, an interesting note about the belts, when these were first introduced in the original Mythic Legions Kickstarter, the only figure that was originally shown with a belt was Attila Leaser. It actually showed him with it around his chest, and I can remember during that campaign people getting really excited about the possibilities of the belts. They were like, wow, I'd really love it if more figures came with the belt. So Four Horsemen took that to heart and they said, hey, that's a really good idea. This is a pretty inexpensive add-on that we can add into the packages. So every single figure came with a belt in Mythic Legions 1.0 and in subsequent waves. Actually, since then, we've even gotten figures that have multiple belts. A couple of them, I remember Colosseum Orc for Orc Legion Builder 3, as he's properly called. He was one of the first ones that I remember coming with two belts. And not only did he come with two, but they were a different color. Almost all the figures come with these black belts, but there are a few other colors as well. Colosseum Orcs are black. Fallon Frostbow comes with like a really light, almost like tannish one. The Black Knight Legion Builder comes with a red one, etc. But every figure has these belts, and there are a couple of ways that you can use them. Essentially, when you use them, you're either going to put them around their torso, the way that it was shown on Attila Leaser, or you're going to put it around their waist. So I've got a figure here. This is a kind of a custom that looks pretty much like Atlas the Conqueror. And you can see he's got these two belts across his chest, which I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But basically what I do when I put on belts is, I usually pop the head off. I usually pop the shoulder armor off because doing that will allow you to more easily get the belt on and off. So I just extend the arm a little bit, just kind of loop it right over around the neck and then fit it where you want it to go. What I tend to do is if I'm going to use it to hold on the pauldrons, then I put the belt right under the little pauldron hole in back, and then I plug the pauldron right in there, and then I just adjust it in front so it looks like it's actually holding the pauldron on. And that's a good segue because that brings me to really the first way that I started using these belts. And that is for some of these barbarian-like bare-chested figures to make it so it looked like there was something holding those shoulder armor, those pauldrons in place. You know, if you look at a figure like this, if the pauldron would be on his shoulder without the belt, it begs the question, what kind of magic is actually holding that piece of armor in place? I guess there could be a strap under the arm, but that seems like it would be very uncomfortable and it would fall off. So this was one of the first things that a lot of people did with the belts. They put them, crossed them on any of the bare-chested barbarian figures, like Asterion the Minotaur, like the Barbarian Legion Builder, like Atlas the Conqueror, to make it so it looked like it was holding those pauldrons in place. Let me show you a couple photos of that, a couple examples of that, I guess you could say. I've got a couple different pictures here to show. So here's an example of two different customs I did. One of them you can see is a custom barbarian, and just like the one I had in my hands a moment ago, you can see that he's got two pieces of shoulder armor there. I used those different belts to make it look like they were actually holding on those shoulder pauldrons. You can also do that with just one strap or one belt and one shoulder pauldron, which is what my orc on the other side here has. I really like that look where it looks like just one shoulder piece of armor strapped on the figure. I think that's a really good looking way, and it's probably the easiest way to use these belts. Okay, there we go. So let's look at the next one here. It doesn't only have to be bare chested, right? While the armored torsos, you could make the argument that the shoulder armor is attached to that. The belts look actually really cool if you use it on the armored torsos as well. And this is both the 1.0 builds and 2.0. So here we have an example where we've got a goblin figure that's wearing some shoulder pauldrons. Interestingly, you'll notice that I've actually got him using 1.0 style pauldrons that I've even customized to put some spikes into. So I really changed that up a little bit. But I think you can see the point here is the idea of using those crossed belts to make it look like the pauldrons are in place. That looks really good. Same thing with the other figure here. This is a 1.0 style figure. It's a character I call Baron Sorrow. He's got, not the armored torso nor the bare torso. He's got more of that like cloth tunic looking torso, which once again, it looks good if you use the belts to strap on those shoulder pauldrons. In this case, I even put some fur underneath those pauldrons to make it look like there was, a little something extra there peeking out from under those. So very cool. So the next thing I'm going to show you is I just showed you that, you can use one belt each way to strap on some armor. You can double these up. You can use 2-3 belts at a time, and you actually get a bit of a different look. That's what I did in this one here. So this is a custom that I call the Bear, and he's obviously a big gladiator-looking type character. And a few things you'll notice. Number one, this uses those red belts that I mentioned that come with the Black Knight Legion builder. So as opposed to the brown belts that come with most of the figures, these red belts actually do offer a cool, different look. Because of this custom, I was already using a gold and red color scheme here. It was really fun for me to use, the red belts. And in this case, I used 3 of them. So by really pairing them together, by bunching them up, you get a lot of coverage. Instead of it just being a thin single belt, you get a really different look to the character simply by adding those all in together. Nothing hard here, nothing tricky. Just put one belt on, put a second belt, put a third belt, and there you go. You can get that look where you've really started to build them up to a much thicker belt across their torso. Okay, what's next? So just like you can use multiple belts going one way, you can use multiple belts and kind of mix and match them. So check this out. This is one of the ones I did for a barbarian. I have a group of barbarians that I call my Highland barbarians, and this is one of them there. So you can see in this particular case, I've not only doubled up the belts, 2 going one way, 2 going the other, but by spreading them apart and not putting them close together, you get a different look there. And it starts to look almost a little less like belts and a little more like armor. I like this look because there are so many bare-chested characters. You know, if you have a whole array of barbarians, even just doing something like this where you're changing the way the belts are positioned on their torso is going to give you some visual variety. Once again, super, super simple. All I did was put 2 belts on one way, 2 belts on the other way, and then just spread them apart a little bit. And you can see in this case, I'm not using them to hold on pauldrons. I'm just using them as belts strapped on this barbarian's torso. It really gives it that look almost, like I said, of like some leather type armor. Okay, so not only can you strap the belts, you know, going one way, you know, 2 one way, 2 the other, but you can actually do something cool by crisscrossing them. So this is 2 different customs that I've done that, in addition to using 2 belts each way, instead of putting 2 on the left side and then 2 on the right, I cross them, almost like cross hatch them. So I put 1 going left, 1 going right, 1 going left, 1 going right. And what that does is it creates almost like that weave pattern. And you can see 2 examples here. The fox one, my Kitsune aviator here, those belts are pushed really close together. So you get a tight weave that, once again, it covers so much of that torso that it almost makes it look like leather armor covering this character as opposed to just belts strapped across. On the other hand, here I have my female barbarian, also a member of my Highland barbarians. You can see that I've crisscrossed those. I've made that weave pattern, but like I did on the previous barbarian I showed, I actually spread these apart a little bit so they don't look all tight together. I'm also holding on some pauldrons, put some fur under that. I'm starting to use, you can see some different effects here, some different approaches here in how I use those belts. All of this is super simple, but I've now shown a number of different figures, and what I hope you're starting to see is the variety of display looks that you can get simply by using these belts, right? Okay, so what do we have next? Now, I said you can use the belts around the torso, but you can also use it around the belt. So if you're going to want to use it around the waist, you are going to want to separate the figure. You're going to want to pull the figure apart at the waist because trying to get the belt any other way over, you're going to hit all the spiky armor. It ends up being very, very difficult. So what you can do here, and you can use a 1.0 belt on the waist of a 1.0 figure, but actually the 2.0 belts were just a little bit smaller. You know, this is a 1.0. The 2.0 basically fits right inside of it. If you use that 2.0 belt on a 1.0 waist, it's actually a little bit tighter. So you can decide exactly what you want to do, how tight you want that to be. Different waist armor pieces will affect how the belts hang as well differently. But you can put that on, and this is a nice way that you can have, like, you know, a belt at their side. Then you just connect that body back in, and now you have a belt around their waist. Very, very easy to do. Because the belts have that little loop, you can have a sword at their side, or you can put 2 of them and kind of crisscross them the either way, almost like gunslinger-like, and you can get a cool look by doing that. So let's look at that one now. So these are 2 customs that I've done where I kind of crisscrossed the belts. We've got my Dro elf Dritz, who, he's got the swords at his side. He's got the belts at his side. If I want to put his 2 scimitar swords at his side, I can do them through the loops there. Similarly, I have my female archer. This was actually a version of the character Snow White that I created. This is my Mythic Legions version of Snow White. And I put some daggers in those little belts to have at her waist. Again, really, really simple to do. Just mixing them up. And you can see also on the Snow White, not only did I use those kind of hip belts, but I also have a belt around her torso. And in this particular case, she's using a custom coat that I got from my fodder bin. This goes right over the coat. I've got her quiver of arrows in the back. You can start using these to, store the weapons, to put, like I just said, daggers around their waist, or quivers at their back, or swords at their back. that's one of the reasons why the belts became so popular in Mythic Legions and in customizing and just displaying Mythic Legions as is it does give you some cool variety for how you want to display the different pieces, how you want to, array the weapons. All these characters come with a variety of weapons. You can't fit them all on their hands to begin with. So being able to use the belts to store them on their body and display them on their body, that's a lot of fun as well. So continuing on, another idea you can do is you can use those belts, but you can glue stuff to them. So you can use other pieces of figures, other fodder pieces to add some variety to your displays. Here we've got my kind of ghost fisherman type character where I strapped some of these like walrus tusk pieces to the belt around his waist to further add some accessories to that character. The Black Panther figure here, that is an example of I used those belts similar to how I've shown, where it looks like they're holding on pauldrons. But in this case, those pauldrons are actually not Mythic Legions pauldrons. Those are from an old figure line called Stan Winston's Realm of the Claw. A lot of people have used this line in customizing Legions. I've certainly used it quite a bit. Those pauldrons are not like the Mythic Legions pauldrons. They don't plug into the back of the figure. So I needed some way to hold them in place. In this particular case, they're kind of rubbery type, pieces of armor. I just glued them to the actual belts. So realistically, I wanted those belts to look like they were holding that armor in place, but the reality is they actually are. Those belts, the armor is glued to those belts, so they are actually holding them in place in that example. Couple more things to show. One other thing you can do with belts is instead of using it as a belt around the torso or around the waist, you can use them in some different ways to make it look like you're maybe lashing things on to the figure. And I have a couple examples of that here. So one of the ones I have is one of my most popular customs, actually. This is kind of my tribute to Boba Fett. So this is a very popular character. This custom was actually featured in the Action Figure Adventure documentary. Whenever I show it at shows or whenever I share pictures of it, it's always very popular. And one of the things I wanted to do with this custom was, as I was trying to recreate the Boba Fett design, the iconic Boba Fett design, but translate it to Mythic Legions, I wanted to do something to get that iconic skull on his shoulder armor. Now, obviously, Boba Fett has the skull painted on his armor. What I wanted to do was create an actual skull that was kind of like lashed on or strapped on to the armor. So what I did here was I used a belt and I wrapped it around the shoulder armor. It goes underneath the armor, and then I glued that skull and those horns right on top of that strap of that belt, so it looks like it's lashed in place. If you look at the other photo here of the Boba Fett character, the full scale one, the full bodied one, I also did use some belts and wrapped it around the bottoms of his shins, his leg armor, to make it look like the tools that Boba Fett has in his, on his legs, on his shins. I want to do that as well. I used one around his waist here. I really did a lot of the different treatments that I'm talking about right here on this Boba Fett figure to give him that look of that kind of bounty hunter that's carrying a lot of weapons around with him, and they're all strapped to his, his body. The last one I have to show here is also that idea of using the belts to kind of lash something onto a character. This is a figure I showed recently as part of my All-Stars 3 challenge, where I wanted to use just the All-Stars 3 figures to create, some different customs. The one you see here with the bucket helmet, I wanted to make it look like that elf shield was not just being held in his hand, but was actually like lashed onto his arm as some giant, blade-like shield. So just by wrapping those belts around that shield and around the arm that's behind it, I was able to get that look. You can also see a photo here of one of my Aquapower turtle characters. This is a back view of that character, which what I did was I used that Mythic Legions turtle shell shield, and I wrapped the belt around that shield before I plugged it into the figure's back. So it looks like, you know, there's legitimately a belt around this turtle shell. I can put that sword. I've got a specific sword for this character that he's now holding on the back of that shell. Very, very simple. You just put it right on, put that sword right through. But once again, gives you a really cool look. So super, super simple ways to add some belts to your figures. When you're thinking about all these different customizations, all these different parts you're using, you know, whether you're just popping and swapping pieces, whether you're repainting mythics, whether you're using third-party printed pieces, don't sleep on using these belts in different ways. As you get more and more figures, some of them you may use the belts with, some of them you won't. Save those belts, keep them in a pile, because you will certainly have times when you want to use multiples. I showed a bunch of examples here where I was using 3 and 4 belts to create the looks that I was going for. To do that, you're going to have some extra belts. So keep those belts in your fodder pile and revisit them when you're ready to create some looks like you see here. If you enjoy videos like this, certainly let me know. Give the video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments if there's something that you want to share with me. And certainly if you're not subscribed to the channel already, please consider doing so. That helps me out, and it'll help you be notified whenever I post a video like this. Until then, I can't wait to see what you make.